Netflix has released a series of Unfortunate Events Season 2, and I gotta tell ya, this is uncharted territory for me. Prior to the Netflix series, all I saw was the 2004 Jim Carrey movie, and that's it. We never got a sequel, and as a result, I am completely in the dark as to where the story goes from here. So this will be interesting to say the least. So without any further ado, let's get this binge watch started. So the first episode continues right where this douchebag left the kids in the last season, and I gotta say, I do love the way it opens with a fourth wall joke that doesn't fully break the fourth wall. For me, this was a perfect way to start off this season, as it's very different and reminds you what a strange world this is. It's also clear they are acknowledging this because they filmed the last season quite a while back and the kids have grown up since then. And I'm also certain that they did this to silence quibblers like me, and they succeeded. Well done, guys. So from here, the kids are completely separated from each other during their school lessons, and oh boy, we are introduced to some new despicable characters. And I'm actually rooting for Olaf to get here and kill them all in even more horrendous ways than he did in the previous season. Whether he does or not is yet to be seen, but a guy can hope. We also have a new character called Carmelita, and she is delightfully bratty and weird. She's rude in a very snobbish way, constantly tries to rhyme even when there's no rhymes to be made, and she keeps addressing the Baudelaires as orphans. She also randomly pushed a kid because she didn't like the look of his face. And if that isn't bad enough, as the episode continues, you start to realize that she is just one step away from being a psychotic killer doll. In fact, I'm pretty certain this movie was supposed to be for her. Now, out of all of these mean-spirited characters, we do have a few nice ones. We have a librarian, who despite leaving the smallest impact, was a nice addition, but the ones that are the most important are a couple of nice little kids that the Baudelaires meet. And the reason I say they're important is because they seem to have a connection to our main characters, as their parents are also part of the same organization. So that's interesting, and I look forward to seeing where that goes in the upcoming episodes. Now, the main goal of this episode is that a member of the VFD is supposed to give the Baudelaires this book which will supposedly tell them everything they need to know about the organization their parents were a part of. But of course, he is completely incompetent, so it doesn't end up happening. I really hope this isn't a running theme throughout this season. Next up, we finally get to see Olaf, and something I immediately noticed is that he's a lot less cruel than he was in the last season, and there seems to be a bigger emphasis on comedy this time round. And I thoroughly approve of this, because it adds some much needed lightheartedness to the show, which I still feel is quite depressing. Also, Neil Patrick Harris's Olaf makeup looks a lot better in here. In Season 1, you could see through his makeup and make out his face. In Season 2, however, he's a lot harder to make out, so props to the makeup department for upping their game this season. Now, as much as I was impressed by the new and enhanced style of comedy, it sometimes goes way too far. For example, why would this guy admit defeat when two old women hold soft and harmless utensils near his shoulder? I mean, no. For a show that constantly threatened knife violence to children in the first season, it absolutely baffles me that they didn't do the same with this guy. And even if they didn't use a knife, of all things, why use weightless kitchen utensils? Even for this show, that is just too stupid and cartoony. And that's one of my major complaints with this episode, and I really hope this does not carry through to the rest of the season. Something else I found strange is that every single one of these characters are completely odd. In the first season, everyone had an element of weirdness to them, but they still had character traits that were comparable to ordinary people. In this episode, however, everyone just comes off as over-the-top cartoon characters, and I really didn't like it. Now, before I conclude, I just want to quickly point out some other stuff I noticed. Firstly, Sunny's dubbing is not as horrendous as it was in the first season. As a matter of fact, it has been drastically improved here. Secondly, when the Baudelaires see Olaf, their reaction was too subdued and could have been much better. Also, Mr. Poe is still a mindless git in this episode, and I sure hope he gets his comeuppance by the end of this story, preferably death. And unfortunately, Lemony Snicket shows up an absurd amount of times to explain the story, and I still don't like it. Now, in my versus video, I expressed my disdain whenever he did this, and despite you guys telling me it was in the books, I still stand by my initial thoughts. And if you stick around to the end of this video where I give my concluding thoughts on this entire season, I will tell you why. But overall, after watching this episode and reflecting on it, it's good, but it's just too silly. Also, I'm just not as worried for the kids in this one. Even they don't seem that bothered with the unfortunate situations they're in. You can argue that they have been through worse in the first season, but still, it just feels like they are going through the phases but not emoting like normal human beings. So we'll see if the next part either elevates my complaints for this episode or rectifies them. But on the whole, this was still an enjoyable episode. It just needs to tone down the silliness. Alright, we're on to episode 2, and the first scene we are treated to is Olaf telling a story in his new disguise, and it was bloody hilarious. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that out of all of his disguises, this one was the best. His mannerisms, his fake persona, it was a ton of fun to watch, and anytime he said,
"Let me tell you a story." That reminds me of a story that I'm gonna tell you. Jim, let me tell you a story. This reminds me of a story.
I couldn't stop laughing. Now at first I was wondering how he got in without getting detected by this bullshit detector, and then it was explained that Carmelita let him in. That's right, and to make things worse, she knows who he is, yet she insists on making excuses for him whenever he's in danger of being caught. She deserves some brutal discipline. Or a beating, whichever one means she loses that smug smile, I'm down for. For now though, I am more than willing to accept what she got. This person, who turns out to be Lemony Snicket's brother, gives her a very satisfying talking down to. But it isn't enough. In such a small amount of time, this little girl has become a detestable little monster, and I really hope she has something unfortunate happen to her, and not just a delicate talking down to. Also, I am really starting to appreciate the inclusion of the Quagmire kids. Giving the Baudelaires some company is nice, and God knows they deserve something nice at this point. As for stuff I didn't like, well, the kids yet again try to expose Olaf and no one believes them. And honestly, this is just tired. It was a fun concept in the first season, but it's the exact same thing in this season and nothing about it is different. In the end, he gets recognized and then he gets away. It's really becoming less effective, and I hope we don't have to go through this stuff all over again. Even Mr. Poe's buffoonery is back. His shrimp-sized brain should come to the realization that when the Baudelaires say, "This is Count Olaf," maybe I should trust them because they have always been right 100% of the time, and I have always been wrong 100% of the time. But he doesn't, and it results in me wanting to kill this dumbass character even more. Also, the whole thing with getting the kids to do their schoolwork as well as Olaf's 9-hour fake athletic running lessons was pretty ridiculous. And this headmaster doesn't believe the kids either when they say that this is Count Olaf, even though he should know exactly what teachers he has employed in his own bloody school. And I didn't like how the story is making him that stupid. He is getting awfully close to being the new Mr. Poe, and for the love of God, we don't need another one. As for other problems, the organization the Baudelaire's parents are working for are just pathetic. They know what Olaf is up to, so they should be able to quickly take him out, but they don't. Instead of fiddling around on the phone like a 5-year-old, they should actually do something or just stay out of the way. I mean, you gotta admit that your methods are doomed to fail when even Mr. Poe starts to notice something's not right. Not to mention, it's the Quagmires who find the book that this incompetent git failed to deliver. I mean, seriously, how dumb is it that they can't even deliver a book? The episode ends with the triplets being kidnapped, and most likely the Baudelaires are going to escape the school and try to rescue them, or Olaf will come back in another disguise and use them as leverage. We'll have to see. Now, after watching 2 episodes, I can say that this season seems to have a much more reduced feeling of dread than the first. And this does result in Olaf being a lot less intimidating. And it's because of this, I think Jim Carrey's Olaf is far superior to Neil Patrick Harris's portrayal in Season 2. Which is kind of a shame, as I thought Harris did a better job in Season 1. You know, it just hit me that Snicket here is played by Nathan Fillion. Here we go again. The episode opens with Mr. Poe taking the Baudelaires to their new guardians. I can't believe we are back to this formula. On the upside, he did get a nosebleed and that made me happy. Yeah, I will be counting my blessings as we go here. So we meet Jerome Squalor and his wife, Esme, and it appears that the only reason they want to adopt the Baudelaires is for the publicity. Although there are subtle hints that they care, but you really need to read between the lines. Moving on to a more positive note, Olaf shows up in what is undoubtedly his best entrance ever. And then, 4 things hit me. 1. I can't believe Olaf is still doing even more disguises. 2. Neil Patrick Harris is doing an amazing job with these multiple personalities whilst keeping the core of his performance as Count Olaf. 3. This episode has solidified that all the adults in this world are stupid. I mean, this is really ridiculous. And 4. If the movie had sequels, I can't help but wonder what Jim Carrey would have done with these disguises. Regardless, Harris does a wonderful job, and when you find out Olaf's plan, it is really surprising and hilariously cruel. And this episode made me realize how good the set design has been in this season so far. This episode in particular looks really quite nice, and the house they're in practically has an infinite number of rooms, but at some points you can tell that they clearly redesigned some of the same sets. And this scene is additional proof that all the adults in this world are stupid. Olaf says that he's allergic to orphans, and they actually believe him. Anyway, when the characters make their way to the restaurant, this is where the episode gets really good. I love how Olaf and his crew put in all the effort to hijack the restaurant they go to, but Esme is disgusted by it, which results in his plan failing. And I especially liked how Larry tries to get back at Olaf for sticking him in that freezer. And the way he's talking indirectly to the kids is also really amusing. And I downright loved how Olaf was put on the spot so much times in this episode. It makes the stale formula a little more new and interesting. And the way he uses his fake foreign accent to insinuate an F-bomb to the organization that forced him to sing really took me aback, and again, I broke out in crazy laughter. I immediately stopped, however, when I realized that we actually had to listen to him sing. And on a side note, I really liked the fast-talking and concise security guard. I don't know, something about his performance reminded me of Bruce Campbell if he were an awkward fast-talking cop or security guard. And the episode ends with the Baudelaires finding the kidnapped triplets, so I look forward to seeing where the story picks up from here. This scene was hilarious. So the Baudelaires find the Quagmires, and then they realise that after coming all the way down, they need to go all the way back up to acquire some tools to break them out. But on their way, they bump into Esme, and interestingly, she has a heart-to-heart with the Baudelaires and says that despite negatively coming across as she does, she is still their guardian and she really cares for them. And it was at this moment that I knew she was dead. And I was 100% absolutely wrong. It turns out that Olaf was Esme's former acting coach and she was on his side the whole time. So that was unexpected, very unexpected, although it does make you wonder why she left the restaurant that Olaf had sabotaged. Anyway, moving on. Now, the character that really surprised me in this episode was Sunny. I never thought I would say this, but she is the most badass baby in a movie or TV show ever, and this is the most hilarious use of her teeth I have seen. She even gets her own solo mission and even bribes one of Olaf's henchmen. This was my favourite scene of the entire episode. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually want to see more of the unrealistic absurdities from Sunny in future episodes, as she was definitely a surprise in this one. And in general, this episode had quite a few surprises. Here's another couple. The kids go through the tunnel and find that it leads to their home. And holy shit, Snicket's brother has Olaf's tattoo on his ankle. That is one hell of a twist. I just wish they made it a bigger reveal because it was kind of portrayed like it was nothing. The kids also go to the auction house to rescue the triplets, and on their way they run into Mr. Poe. And I like how they don't even bother telling him about Olaf anymore, as they know he isn't going to be of any help to them. And when they get to the auction house to save the Quagmires, the entire scene was fantastic. Pretty much every character was placing a bid, and this whole scene was filmed and edited in a very energetic way. But in the end, Olaf gets the upper hand and escapes. And of all times for him to get captured, I don't think there was a better time than this. So yeah, I am disappointed that he got away. Again. Which means we are going to have to deal with this same scenario all over in the next episode. I can't wait. But yeah, I ultimately have no complaints with this episode. This is undoubtedly some of the most fun I've had with this show so far, and it absolutely destroys all the episodes in Season 1. And although the formula is really starting to wear thin, they are doing some changes with it. For example, it feels like the Baudelaires are starting to go on the offensive, which I like. I just hope they don't become full-on victims like they did in Season 1, because that will fully revert the show back to its old ways, and I don't want that to happen. I want it to change things up, and it's doing the minimum amount of that so far. The kids are on their way, courtesy of Mr. Poe, to the VFD village, and on their tail is Olaf. And on his tail is Snicket, and the librarian. And oddly enough, when Mr. Poe is not demonstrating his stupidity around Olaf, he is surprisingly funny. So it's unfortunate that that's the very next scene that comes up. Olaf is right in front of him, and he still doesn't recognize him. But he does get absurdly ripped off by Olaf, so that calmed me down. Anyway, the kids meet the Council of Elders, and these are certainly an odd lot. And taking into account everyone we have seen so far, that is saying something. Whenever the kids try to say anything, they persistently and annoyingly tell them to stay quiet. Heck, even when they open the ground for questions, they still tell them to stay quiet. Council of Elders, more like a council of assholes. And a couple of minutes later, we are interrupted by Olaf's girlfriend, who is also doing disguises now. I really am getting tired of these disguises. And again, the kids try to tell everyone who she is, and the Council of Assholes tell them to stay silent. Seriously, these stories are really lazy when it comes to having no one trust the kids. Anyway, we are introduced to the Baudelaire's new overly sensitive guardian. You get this guy the slightest bit intimidated and he passes out. Nothing but the best here. They truly are in safe hands. Meanwhile, Snicket and the librarian finally catch up to Olaf, and what do? They immaturely play cowboys with some admittedly hilarious corny dialogue. They actually capture Olaf, and then let him get away, and then get captured themselves. So later on, they give Snicket a tiny makeover and turn him in as Olaf. And this delinquent thinks that Snicket is Count Olaf just because he sees a similar tattoo on his ankle. He completely disregards his face, voice, and body structure, and this rejuvenated my anger for Mr. Poe. What the hell is wrong with this asshole? Earlier, I said he has a brain the size of a shrimp, but that's implying he actually has a brain. He's just pathetic, and anytime he's on screen, I just want to strangle him. Also, this is Olaf's first disguise, whose persona really got on my nerves. Whenever he does this, it annoyed the crap out of me, and he does it way too much. On an interesting note, unless I'm mistaken, Olaf was apparently a member of the VFD. I honestly can't remember if we were told this or not in the last season. That being said, I really did like the interactions between Olaf and Snicket regarding their history with the Baudelaire's mum, but unfortunately we won't be getting any more conversations like that because apparently Snicket dies. That's right, it's implied that Olaf beats him to death with a crowbar. That was both unexpected and dark. I really am not sure what I think about that. But I am sure about one thing, it makes me hate Mr. Poe even more for getting the supposed hero of the story killed. The ending better show Mr. Poe get murdered, or better yet, fired. If not, I will give this show a lower score when it reaches its final season. But on the plus side, this does mark the only episode this season where I felt genuine hate towards Olaf again. So the episode ends with everyone thinking Olaf is dead, and that means that from now on, instead of Mr. Poe saying, "That isn't Olaf, that is absurd," he is now going to say, "That isn't Olaf, he's dead." And I really don't like it when the show does that shit, mainly because it wasn't earned. Anyway, despite my complaints, I'm definitely interested in seeing where it goes next because this episode was still a good time. You know, it just hit me. Now that Olaf is together with his rich girlfriend, why is he still after the Baudelaire's fortune? He could just get married to her, kill her, and then take her fortune. Why is he still going after the kids? This episode opens with the kids telling Mr. Poe that Olaf isn't really dead, but he of course doesn't listen. There are countless other times where they practically give themselves away and Mr. Poe still doesn't catch on that these two are the tiniest bit odd. Or familiar for that matter. The kids even openly tell the town that this is Olaf, as well as explaining his whole entire plan, and the retarded town doesn't believe them. Olaf even accuses Sunny that she is the killer, and guess what? The town believes that. Why didn't the Baudelaires just tell Mr. Poe to check Olaf's ankle for the tattoo of the eye? No pun intended, but that always seems to be Olaf's Achilles heel. This episode was just depressing for all the wrong reasons. Writing characters into a horrible situation is easy, but putting them into a situation in a convincing way requires effort, and these stories just force it. And that feels way too apparent in this episode. Esme even gives herself multiple different names, and the town still doesn't find her or Olaf Presley here the least bit suspicious. Anyway, the whole town is after the Baudelaires, and Mr. Poe's demented wife is really enjoying this. The town is even looking to burn the kids alive. All these people really are scum. I would love to see this town cross over with the Purge. I'd pay good money to see that. That's right, £1. Also, these two attempt to help, and ultimately fail. Even though they could have put the record straight and got the town to believe that Olaf is really alive, but they don't. Utterly useless. I gotta say though, the chase scene was a lot of fun, and this fake out was juvenile, but genius. Anyway, the Baudelaires rescue the Quagmires, escaping the fire truck with Sunny at the helm, and the whole town turns on Olaf and Esme for killing a bird. For once, the stupidity of this town really pays off. So yeah, I wasn't impressed with this episode. Its stupidity was just too much for me, and I have put up with a lot of its silliness in the past. The adults in this show have just become so dumb that they are making the ones in the Jim Carrey movie appear as real people. Here's hoping the next 4 episodes are better. The kids are now on the run, and it's official. They are criminals, thanks to this moron. In spite of this, they are looking to send a message to Mr. Poe, and then guess who they stumble upon?
Hello, hello, hello.
How the hell does he find them so quickly? I mean, this is too convenient even for him. And thanks to Mr. Poe, Olaf is now a free man, and everyone thinks he's dead. He is the gift that just keeps on giving, isn't he? The dumbasses in the show recognize the Baudelaires, but they don't even recognize Olaf from his multitude of posters that were plastered all over the place. The kids manage to catch a ride with some hippies, and they start singing.
We are volunteers fighting disease, and we're cheerful all day long. If someone said that we were sad, that person would be wrong.
I honestly don't think the show can get any scarier than this. So the three make their way to a hospital, and they luckily run into someone who conveniently has poor vision, so we won't recognize them. And then we have Olaf, who has shown up in another disguise, and even though it goes against all kinds of logic, they still manage to make their way in. I really hate this show sometimes. Oh, and Esme is looking for something called a sugar bowl. Also, how can a blind guy see better than this retarded woman? He could tell that Olaf was full of crap, whereas this woman couldn't. And man, Olaf is still hilarious. The fact that they are trying to scare this stupid woman to death is great. I knew they were going to do a Shining Twins scene with the old ladies. They even gave them the red It balloons. And they really didn't do much else. This setup was great and they really could have played with it. And they did the bare minimum with it, unfortunately. If you want to see something with a good Shining parody, then go watch Ready Player One. Anyway, Olaf manages to take over the hospital, and the whole time I am just wondering, where the hell is the rest of the staff? Surely a hospital like this needs plenty of workers, but there are only like 2 people who work in here. You see, it's for circumstances like this that really bother me about this show. It needs to feel more natural, but instead, it just feels rigged in the cheapest way possible. Now, I did really like the scene in the hallway when the Baudelaires are running away from Olaf and his thugs, but then Snicket shows up in the most inopportune moment and kind of ruined the scene. Like I said, I'll talk about him at the end of this video. Moving on, I gotta say, I really liked the interactions between the kids and Hal. Him bringing them some chicken soup at night was also a very nice moment, and I love how he brags about how much he calls the kids trustworthy right before they are about to double-cross him. Also, Esme dresses in what looks like a cross between Cruella de Vil if she was in a Tim Burton movie, and the only reason for this is so that they can make her look creepy when she chases after the kids. But before we talk about that, the kids find Snicket's debriefing video, and apparently he says that someone else survived the fire. I wonder if he's talking about the Baudelaire's house fire or the Quagmires, but not surprisingly, they are interrupted. Klaus and Sunny make it out, but Violet gets separated, and as she is making her escape, Snicket stops the scene and ruins the bloody moment again. And all he does is talk about the feeling of running away from danger. We will definitely talk about this scene later too. So the only thing that surprised me in this episode is the video message from Snicket, but at this point we know that whenever the Baudelaires have a ray of hope, it's always taken away from them, so I doubt this is going to work in their favour. So, on to the next episode, where Klaus and Sunny are undoubtedly going to succeed in rescuing Violet, and then they're going to be on the run again. Why the hell would you hide butterflies from the government by putting them all in your mouth? This show, I tell ya, it can be frustratingly weird and then amusingly weird. Also, Olaf, through intimidation tactics, makes a mistake and Violet manages to escape. But then this stupid broad makes so much noise that Olaf finds them and Violet gets captured. Again. You know, earlier I mentioned this show should cross over with The Purge, and maybe just for this character, the show should cross over with Saw. Then she can scream all she wants and I won't object. Now, quite smartly, Klaus gets the idea that if the adults in this world are so stupid that they can't see through a basic disguise, then maybe he can use their stupidity to his advantage and get a disguise of his own. And then he bumps into Olaf, and this indirect conversation they have is bloody fantastic and so hilarious. And I especially love how Sunny nicks Olaf's list, and the reaction on his face was priceless. And then we see this face, and the reaction was worth much less. And then the show gets completely messed up as Olaf arranges for Klaus to decapitate Violet in front of all of these people. And this is where the show became really stupid again. Even in this disastrous world, what kind of hospital has staff that cheer for people to saw a patient's head off? And what kind of doctors would keep chanting, It's bloody stupid, even for this show. And it gets even dumber when Mr. Poe suddenly shows up, and again, he doesn't recognize Olaf or his henchmen whose faces are clearly exposed and have no alterations to their usual look. Now Klaus, stalling with a long description on knives from a book he had read, was great. A few minutes later, Violet wakes up, the kids are blamed for a whole lot more, Olaf sees Snicket's video saying that there is a survivor of the fire, and the Baudelaires make their escape, only for Snicket to interrupt the flow of the scene. Again. So the kids hitch a ride in Olaf's trunk, interesting choice of transport, and we'll see where the story goes from here. This episode opens with the past showing us events of what happened before the Baudelaires were born, and we very nicely see Uncle Monty and other members of the VFD, including villains and other characters who I found irritating. And I love how this episode messes with you. As usual, at the beginning of the episode we see Lemony Snicket, and at first you think he's going to give us the usual narration, but it turns out that he was actually talking to his brother. So that was a nice little subversion of expectations. I really liked that. After the flashback, we are taken back to the present, and Olaf thinks one of the Baudelaire's parents are alive, but as I said, I kinda doubt it. Any happiness for the Baudelaire's isn't going to happen. So Olaf arrives at his destination, which is a circus, incidentally, and the reason he came here is because he wants to meet a fortune teller from the VFD, and her fortune telling apparently is so accurate that it freaks Olaf out. Although what freaked me out was her eyes. They look bloody freaky.
What is your heart's desire?
Anyway, the Baudelaire's attempt to speak to the fortune teller and get a rather big disguise to do so, except Sunny, who can be easily recognized. But the show does make an attempt to remedy this as she hilariously acts like a rabid dog, and as a result, Olaf and his goons aren't able to take a proper look at her. Anyway, they're hired for the circus act, and then we see Ronnie from The Flash. I almost didn't even believe it at first, and it's actually quite hilarious that he's considered a freak only because he's very intuitive with both his hands. I mean, that's a talent right there, but having the show portrayed as a freak was actually quite funny. And honestly, I didn't see this coming. The fortune teller is really the librarian in disguise. She tells Olaf that one of the Baudelaire's parents are alive, and rightfully so, that freaks him out. But enough about that, the House of Freaks show is about to begin. The part of the act where Olaf is making fun of the freaks was funny, but everything else is just crap, and I was just waiting for it to stop. Later on, the Baudelaire's look through the librarian's various films and see footage of the VFD, and they see a lot of interesting clips which explain some of the questions we had in the first season, as well as explaining what the VFD members do. And it's revealed that VFD means Volunteer Fire Department, literally and figuratively. And the episode ends as the Baudelaire's reunite with the librarian, and they're so happy they're practically crying, and that is really nice. Finally seeing them happy as opposed to being depressed is good. So I guess that means the librarian is going to die in the next episode. And with Olaf bringing lions on the way, that's most likely going to be the outcome. So, let's find out with the final episode of A Series of Unfortunate Events Season 2. Following the events of the previous episode, Madame Lulu, the librarian tells the kids how she got here, how she escaped her prison cell, and what the circus really is. Which, incidentally, is a place where VFD members come to gather information. Which means that Madame Lulu isn't really real, she's just a character that VFD members play. Or at least just the female members can. So yeah, that was all interesting. But forget about that.
This show is about to get a lot more entertaining, and not just because I'm back in it.
Now, I was particularly curious to see the lions, as CGI animals on TV don't usually look very good and can't be on screen for too long. And the same thing goes for this show. They look like the best computer-generated lions I've seen on a TV series, but they still look fake. Their movement in particular just screams, "A computer made me." And Esme deviously says that the freaks can join Count Olaf if they push Madame Lulu into the pit of lions. So we'll see what comes of that. Also, I like how indirect and unclear Olaf is. When Olaf says certain things to Madame Lulu, you can't tell if he is insulting her, figuring her out, or threatening to kill her. And what the hell is Mr. Poe doing here? And can't he tell that this is Count Olaf?
I am your ringmaster, Count Olaf. But a different Count Olaf than the one you've read about in the papers, who is dead.
How incredible. Who knew there were so many counts with one eyebrow named Olaf?
We're both very handsome.
I swear to God, if anyone gets thrown into this pit, then it better be him. Anyway, Olaf's trick is that one freak is going to jump into the pit of lions and die. And then we get a question from a little member of the audience. If the adults are so stupid in this world, then I doubt a kid would have anything good to say.
I have a question. Is this legal?
Unbelievable. That is the only adult question I have ever heard anyone say on this show. This has just proved to me that the kids are more like adults in this show than the actual adults. Seriously, this should be a world where the kids rule and the adults are the ones treated like children. Anyway, the Baudelaire's managed to convince the crowd to get Olaf to push them into the pit, this way they can throw him into the pit instead, but he pusses out so he gets Madame Lulu to throw them in. But in the end, she reveals her true identity and the kids don't get pushed off into the pit. She does. Because she stupidly makes her motivational speech on the freaking plank of all places. I mean, how could she be so stupid? This really is a shame because I would have cared for her death if she wasn't so dumb. So Olaf takes all the freaks as recruits and burns the carnival. We're taken to the road, but then in a surprise twist, it turns out that Olaf knew that these were the Baudelaire's for quite a while. And the episode ends in a cliffhanger as Olaf has Sunny and the circus freaks cut the rope attaching Klaus and Violet onto the car, which results in them falling to their possible deaths. But we know that obviously isn't going to happen. But that's where the season ends, on a decent cliffhanger. And I thought this episode was good. Having the last two episodes of the season where Olaf isn't in disguises to catch the Baudelaire's made for a nice change and made the episode feel fresh. So, what did I think of this show as a whole? Well, I thought it was very good. It's much more fun than the first season, has far improved comedy, a much better soundtrack, vastly superior and consistent special effects, and all around it has more memorable episodes. The issue, however, is that the problems that plagued the first season are still here. The biggest one being that this story still has no idea how to convincingly put the kids in a bad situation, so it just forces them into it by having everyone treat the kids like a dog that has taken a crap on the carpet when really it was the cat. I know this is an element from the books, but I honestly don't care. This goes far beyond the concept of adults not listening to children. The Baudelaires have proved themselves to be trustworthy, but people still refuse to listen to them, even this idiot. Now, I never read the books as a kid, but I was reading Harry Potter, and those books very smartly made an effort to put the characters in unfortunate situations in a plausible manner, and that made the stories so much more engaging to read. A series of unfortunate events, however, takes out any sense of plausibility and just has the world ignore the kids for some reason, and instead of being engaged, it just becomes frustrating, and I tried to just accept it in this season as a joke, but as soon as the story stupidly got Olaf to convince everyone that Sunny and the kids became murderers, that's where things got way too far-fetched for me, even for this show, and it only got worse when they agreed to burn the kids alive. I mean, I couldn't find fun in this even if I tried, and the fact that this all could have been averted if people just saw through Olaf's blatantly obvious disguises just makes it all the more infuriating. It's just lazy writing, and repeating this formula makes the show repetitive and boring. And as for Lemony Snicket's constant descriptive monologues, I know he does it in the books, and well, that's good, because books rely on relaying descriptions to invest the reader as it enables you to envision the events in your head, so I take no issue with Lemony Snicket providing context and descriptions in the books, but the way you tell a story in book form doesn't work in a film format. The primary rule for filmmaking is show, don't tell, but a series of unfortunate events constantly has Snicket telling you things that you don't need to hear, like in this scene when Violet is running away. Snicket shows up to describe the feeling of running away from danger. Now in the books, describing this would make sense as you can't see Violet, so you need a description to tell you what emotion she's going through. In a movie format though, we can see Violet, and therefore the look on her face and the way she runs is all we need to tell us what she's feeling in this moment. So having Snicket pause the scene and tell you how she's feeling when you can so clearly see for yourself just turned this narration into an interruption, and it didn't work at all. And the same goes for the rest of his appearances. The only thing I take no issue with is when he shows up to teach younger viewers what certain words mean, as it adds to the show's family-friendly qualities, but with regards to pretty much everything else, he is absolutely pointless. Now, one of the comments on my series of unfortunate events versus video said that it will all make sense at the end of season 3 as to why Snicket constantly narrates the show, so I will reserve my final judgment for that, and who knows, maybe it will win me over in the end. Only time will tell. I am also constantly being told by a lot of people that several of my complaints, such as the stupid adults and stuff, are in the books, so I shouldn't complain. Well, if my complaints in the show are in the books too, then I would criticize the books for the exact same stuff. Just because something is done in the books doesn't automatically mean it's perfect and devoid of any problems. So, having said all of that, A Series of Unfortunate Events Season 2, just like the first season, gets an 8 out of 10. This has got to be one of the most reluctant positive reviews I have ever given to anything. This series has so many aspects that I like, but it also has stuff that I just downright despise. I really think these stories are seriously flawed. The excuse that this series shows how adults don't listen to kids is not valid anymore, as the show has taken it to even more ridiculous lengths in the previous season, and it has left a bitter taste in my mouth. Here's hoping Season 3 will be a good send-off, as there is still plenty of enjoyment to be had with this show, but if Season 3 ends up being a disappointment, then I can imagine that I will be done with this series and will never want to be affiliated with it again. But anyway, I still enjoyed Season 2, and I am interested to see where the story goes next. If you stuck around through this whole video, then I can only apologize. Now that I've done that, I can thank you for watching this video. Seriously guys, thank you very much. If you like my binge watch video series, then let me know in the comments below. Any feedback would be greatly appreciated, as I am still not sure if I will be doing these on a constant basis. So, I'm off to work on my next versus video. Thanks a lot for sticking around guys, and I will catch all of you next time. Take care.